I had been a police officer for 10 years, patrolling the streets of Jeffersonville, Indiana. My routine had become second nature. Start the shift with a quick briefing at the station, get updates on wanted suspects or recent crimes, and then head out in my cruiser. Some nights it was quiet, just a few traffic stops or the occasional noise complaint. Other nights it was like every call came all at once, and I'd be running around until sunrise. But I never imagined a night like the one I'm about to tell you. Before I became a cop, I was convinced I'd make it in football. I was a decent running back in high school, and my coaches always said I had the speed and the determination. However, after a torn ACL during my senior year, my hopes for a scholarship died. I eventually found my way into the police academy, figuring I could use the discipline I'd honed on the field. Over the years, I learned to love the job, helping people, and feeling like I was doing something good for my community. But by 2016, after a decade on the force, it started to wear on me. That summer, we got word about a string of robberies in the Clarksville area. The suspect's name was Robert Harrington, medium build, dark hair, known for driving a black sedan. He'd been elusive for weeks, always seeming to slip away just as backup arrived. On the night in question, I was in my cruiser near East 10th Street, not far from Walnut Ridge Cemetery. It was past midnight, and the roads were nearly empty except for a stray car or two. I remember noticing a black sedan moving slowly ahead of me as if the driver was unsure of where he was going. The moment he spotted my police car, though, he hit the gas. My instincts kicked in, and I flipped on the lights. He pulled over briefly, so I parked behind him and approached on foot. When I got to the window, the driver was visibly tense. I asked for his license and registration. He hesitated before handing over his ID. Sure enough, it read Robert Harrington. My mind flashed back to the morning briefing. This was the guy, same name, same description. It didn't help that his hand was trembling on the steering wheel. I calmly asked him to step out of the vehicle. He refused at first, muttering that I had the wrong person. I didn't want to spook him, but as soon as I reached for my radio to call for backup, he floored the accelerator and took off. I sprinted back to my cruiser, adrenaline shooting through my veins, and started the pursuit. He led me down a dark side street, away from the main roads. I radioed in, requesting backup and giving my location. The street dead-ended near Walnut Ridge Cemetery, an old place with large iron gates and tall trees that cast strange shadows even in the faint glow of the streetlights. Harrington's black car almost vanished in the darkness. It was tough to keep track of him. When I rounded the final bend, I expected to see his taillights or the silhouette of his car, but the road was completely empty. I slowed to a crawl, scanning left and right, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel. Even with my spotlight on, I couldn't see any sign of movement. Finally, I decided to stop, hoping my backup would arrive soon. I got out of my cruiser, gun drawn, and carefully approached the cemetery's gates. The silence was unnerving. No distant traffic, no crickets, nothing. As I moved closer to the fence, my heart pounded in my ears. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw headlights. A black car. For a second, I thought it was Harrington, doubling back. I aimed my weapon and shouted for the driver to stop. When the sedan came to a halt, a terrified man and a woman stared back at me, their faces lit by my flashlight. They were just a couple returning from a late-night dinner. I asked if they'd seen another black car or anyone running around. They looked at me like I was crazy. They hadn't seen a thing. Apologizing for the scare, I let them go. I continued checking the area, then noticed another black car partially hidden behind some overgrown bushes. My pulse kicked up again. I inched closer, using my flashlight to peer through the windows. The driver's seat was empty, the door slightly ajar. That's when I spotted movement inside the cemetery grounds. A shape, someone dressed in dark clothing, slipped between the headstones. Flashlight shaking a bit, I passed through the iron gate, trying to keep my footsteps quiet. Tombstones jutted out from the darkness, and every step felt heavier than the last. My radio crackled as dispatch confirmed backup was en route, but still a few minutes away. Those minutes felt endless. I swept my light behind each grave, adrenaline surging every time I thought I saw movement. Suddenly, I heard a distinct crunch of gravel behind a large monument. I spun, and for a moment, I froze. 3 figures in black clothing stood there, each one staring at me. They weren't ghosts or anything supernatural. They were real people, and my gut told me they were armed. My heart was pounding so hard that I almost thought I could hear it echo. Then Robert Harrington appeared from behind them. My mind raced, 4 against 1. My backup was still out of sight. One of them shouted at me to drop my weapon. I didn't hesitate. I set it on the ground and raised my hands. They rushed me, pinned my arms back, and forced me onto my knees. I could feel the cold, damp earth through my pants. The smell of wet grass and ancient stone was overwhelming. I remember them whispering to each other, trying to decide what to do with me. I tried to keep calm, but I was terrified. Every second felt drawn out, like I was living in slow motion. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps, more of them, this time from behind the line of graves. I braced myself, thinking more of their gang had arrived, but then I heard a voice yell, "Hands up, police!" My backup had finally made it. Red and blue lights flashed across the tombstones, and within seconds, officers were all around. The men scattered, but it was too late. They were tackled and disarmed, one by one. I was untied, breathless and shaking, as my fellow officers led the suspects to waiting squad cars. They found evidence later that these guys had been using one of the old mausoleums for stashing stolen goods, and there were even open graves they used as hiding spots. The entire thing felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. After that night, I started questioning everything. I'd seen my fair share of danger, but something about being outnumbered, alone, in that dark cemetery pushed me over the edge. I realized how thin the line was between my routine and utter chaos. A few weeks later, I turned in my resignation. I just couldn't see myself going back to those silent streets, waiting for the next close call.